this week for me, I was looking at some of these areas, and I kept when I, tried to look at some areas of humility, and for me it was so easy to jump to other soul points because they connect to each other. They connect to each other in a multitude of ways. So it was so easy for me to jump to other soul points as I look at humility, and I immediately start jumping into other areas and start looking at other areas that's so obvious that I need to work on. We were running late today because we had decided, well, we're going to stop on the way home. We'll just grab something to eat. And Popeyes has their chicken on sale on Tuesday, so we thought we'll just get some chicken to bring. And we were in line for 45 minutes at the drive-thru.
Oh my gosh.
So I needed
patience.
Lots and lots of patience. And it just reminded me how much I got to work on. Lots and lots of patience. Yeah, it was crazy.
Well, they had to make some of their chicken that we ordered. They had to make.
They were obviously not prepared.
They weren't prepared for what was coming.
We just had the basic stuff, so it was with just the basic stuff. It was we got to. There was a half hour when we finally got up to the window. It was it's going to be.
At Academy in Austin Bluffs, there's a Kentucky Fried there too.
Yeah,
better.
I'm sure it is, but it wasn't two for $1.29. So,
a lot cheaper. Yeah.
although after wasting gas and time, it kind of makes it pointless. So it became obvious that I really needed to work on some patience. So when some of those other midot come up, I got a lot to say, lots and lots to say about this.
How can you walk in?
Well, I thought about doing that, but it was the same thing because they were crowded, but they were behind on all their stuff. So people were there waiting. I mean, we saw people there. Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, it was crazy. So we got home and had to wolf it down real quick and head on here.
I've been going through that with having to do medical appointments and stuff. They keep you on hold. I've been on hold sometimes for 30, 40 minutes. And by the time they answer and say, gosh, how are you? Do you really want to know? You keep us on hold for so long and you expect us to be kind and you answer the phone,
It is a challenge, and I think there is a connection there to humility because humility forces us outside of ourselves, to not just think of ourselves, but to also think of others and what other people are going through. So while we're waiting in line or waiting on the phone, and we get frustrated, like, oh my gosh, this is horrible service, it forces us to really look at other people and go, this person's probably working for a little bit more than minimum wage. We don't know the circumstances that were there, so we don't want to take it out on them. It's not fair to just take it out on them, and so to place ourselves in.
Depends on their attitude.
Yes, it does.
I have started nice, and they, said, look, I realize this has nothing to do with you, but we need to record this because this is a problem. And I go into it, and they get real snippy, and I'm like, oh, no, cop an attitude with me. I'm the customer.
Right. Correct. And I agree. I don't want to be the one to antagonize it. I don't want to be the one to be out of control because of my impatience and begin to take it out on somebody else. So humility requires us to look at others and what they're going through and and ask ourselves, if I was in that situation, how would I respond?
Well, I called somebody at McDonald's get fired one time, and I really felt bad about it. Does that make it okay?
Wow.
I like their chicken nuggets, but I like them made fresh, and I always tell them make them fresh. So they hand them out the window. I said, well, are these fresh? Because you've gotten here too soon. Oh yeah, they're fresh. Well, you couldn't have eaten them. They were so hard. So I took them back in. This guy hollered at me, and they fired him right on the spot because he hollered at me. I'm tired of you people coming in here and hollering about stuff. Oh. And they fired him on the spot.
Well, that was not your fault. You didn't get him fired. I mean, if he was rude and disrespectful, that manager saw that and dealt with it. That's out of your hands.
Well, they did right in front of me, that's why I felt bad.
Don't feel bad, Rudy. That's part of customer service.
Yeah.
The other side of the coin is there are times when I have seen that the customer is not always right.
Oh,
And
no.
that is correct, yes.
I mean, I was working at Walmart, there were times I wanted a few people because they were just brain dead.
Well, and the customer may not always be right, but
You have to,
You know-
you have to treat them with respect.
right,
and,
correct.
you know, kindness and all that stuff, but that does not mean that they have the right to scream at you just because
No, of course not.
they think, well, the customer is always right. Bull crap. So,
Well, and again, that's part of humility is being able to look at ourselves and to look at others and to balance that
Yeah.
others' needs are just as important as my own, and what other people are going through is important, is just as important, if not more important, than my impatience or my frustration. But again, that's also not an excuse for people to take advantage of you or to be rude and obnoxious either. So, Jonathan, what did you find about humility? Would you have anything to add?
It's hard.
that was concise at your point.
Yes.
That was right from the heart.
No, it is, because our culture doesn't breed it. It doesn't demand it. It always wants us to look out for number one, So it's hard.
It is. And, I don't think humility requires us not to look out for our own interests and to look out for ourselves, only to look out for others' interests at least as much as ourselves, and to put ourselves in other people's shoes, to see our own role and our own responsibilities, and to recognize that the responsibilities that we have been given by God, that He calls us to live up to it. That authority in Scripture, there's establishment of authority on multitudes of levels, and authority equates to responsibility and accountability. The higher authority you have, the more you're responsible and the more you're held accountable to your actions, because you got people depending upon you. You got people who are relying upon you. And whether it's a teacher to teach people properly, whether it's one of the kings of Israel or a prophet or one of the priests, it required them to really look at themselves as a servant leader. Yes, they were in a position of authority, but they were to see themselves as servants of the people, as ministering to the people and the welfare of the people, not as dictators over the people, if you would, but as servants under God, who is the sovereign. I mean, He alone is king, and we are His servants, who has been lifted up to various degrees in various roles in life, but we are ultimately servants, and we need to look at ourselves as servants, and whatever role that may be, we got a responsibility with that. If you're a spiritual leader in a synagogue, if you're an elder, or if you're a president, or whatever the case may be, there's great responsibility there, and there's accountability. I know that I will stand before God, and I will be held to a higher level of accountability than most. It's kind of scary sometimes. It's scary sometimes because I know that there's an accountability there that goes above and beyond most. And when you understand who you are standing in the presence of and your accountability there, how can you be anything else but humble? Because you realize you're getting it off easy, buddy. What are some of your experiences? Does anybody have anything they want to share in terms of what did you struggle with this week, or maybe some areas where you felt, you know what, I felt really good about this?
The end of last week, I had to go through my yearly testing. I have to ride along with me, critique my driving, Then I have to do a pre-trip and see how many things I miss. Well, I don't miss the stuff, but you have to orally say what you're doing, so you're always gonna forget to say something, even though your mind's looking at it. And one of the critiques that Kathy gave me was that when I come to a stop sign, because you're rushing from stop to stop, I stop and go. And she goes, well, you need to stop longer. And I'm like, okay. And I can take constructive criticism real well. It doesn't bother me. But I caught myself the next day stopping and going because it's like, okay, test is over. And I caught myself and I was like, oh,
Right.
No. You're supposed to stop and wait a couple of seconds before you go. And I caught myself going back into my old habit, which is not what I'm supposed to. You know, part of
Right.
humility is not only to take the, constructive criticism, but to add the improvements to what they're saying. They're not doing it to be mean, they're trying to improve your driving.
Right, yeah.
And by my looking at the clock, going, oh, don't have time to stop, I'm just gonna kind of roll through it, it's like, oh, no. So I caught myself doing that, and it was like, no, that's not what God wants. God wants us not only to hear the improvements that you need to do, but do them. Not just, okay, the test is over till next year, I'm good to go, and, go back to your old habits.
So and I like that. That's really good. Humility means obedience, following instructions.
Well, it's half of it is hearing it
Yeah.
and accepting it without arguing back.
Right.
Which I don't have a problem with that. But the other side of it is, like you said, obedience. And I caught myself just saying, okay, no more tests, I can drive like I used to. It's like, no, I can't do that. So, but going through the course, I would have never stopped to think about it. I would have gone back and drove like I always drive. So, the course, studying humility makes you stop and think, no. It's not just enough to accept the
Right,
improvements that they want you to do. They actually do it.
right. Not just arguing back and defending yourself,
Yeah.
but to take it to the next level of, okay, I've got some things that I can improve on here. I've got some learning to do, and I can listen to those who are in a position of authority and apply it to my life and try to walk in it. That's good. Absolutely. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I just got a short one. I read through this twice this week, and it hit me home a lot because I don't have self-pity. I hope I never do. But I have a lot of low self-esteem sometimes. So sometimes I think that's why I want to talk a lot. And it's not because I don't want to listen, but it makes me feel more important if I say something that I think that somebody might want to hear. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That I sometimes
live with it every day.
that I think sometimes I do that because I don't have that much self-worth about me. And I know I shouldn't because I do have. Jimmy tells
Yeah, I
me
get
I
nervous
do.
and I talk a lot more than I do when I'm not.
So I'm not by myself. Thank
Yeah.
you.
You're not the only two that live there.
Yeah.
But I think that's why I do it. So this hit me at home. I read through this twice. So it was really, told me a lot. Doesn't mean I'm not going to keep talking, but I'll try hard.
So I like that. Too much talking can be a sign of a lack of self-esteem.
There should be a balance in the middle, and that's where I got to get to.
Well, I think it's kind of like what I talked about last week, is that in many ways it's two sides of the same coin. That on one extreme we have people who think really lowly of themselves, who demean themselves, who kind of berate themselves. On the other extreme, people who think maybe a little bit too highly of themselves, and both oftentimes as a result of a lack of true self-esteem, that they're lacking self-esteem and self-confidence in who they are, ultimately in God, and who they are made for. Because those like yourself, you may talk a lot, and I'm not saying you do, I'm just taking your own counsel here. You say you talk a lot, and it's a result of self-esteem because you want to feel more important, and that's understandable. understanding that it's also important to listen, right? To take the time to listen. We spoke about that last week. The importance of listening to what other people have to say. That takes humility, even though it is all a result of self-esteem. Humility requires you to take a step back and listen without the need to feel like you're important. Without the need to, okay, I need to feel like I'm important, so I need to talk. Just to take a step back and listen. I think we all do that to a certain degree. Even the quiet, even those who are fairly quiet. All people can, talk. Sometimes when we talk, we're doing it to maybe make ourselves feel a little bit better about ourselves. Whether it's at work, we're talking, trying to give good ideas or what have you, which can be a good thing, of course. But some of it is a result of lack of self-esteem because we're looking for a pat on the back. We're looking for a congratulations. We're looking for acknowledgement, and that's very human. That's very human to do. So I don't want to berate that. Boy, it's a fine line, isn't it? I don't want to berate that and say, well, that's wrong. But I think there is a balance there that just as we talk, we need to listen. Listen to what other people have to say. Yes, our feelings are important. Yes, we want to feel important. Yes, we want, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, wanting to feel important, of course.
But I'm sorry. It's just that when I had a job, I felt proud of what I was doing. Now I'm not working. I'm looking for something. I have some good jobs that I don't anymore. Let me get rid of this. I want to turn it off.
So I think that is a good point. That is a good point that, sometimes over-talking can be a sign of lack of self-esteem and wanting to feel maybe the center of attention, wanting to feel maybe more important because you're not real confident in who you are as a person, particularly who you are as a person in the eyes of God. Right, Dennis? What do you think, Dennis? What did you struggle with this week? Or success?
Well, I don't know if I had any success, but
Oh, I'm sure you had some success.
I know I just tend to be more reserved and sit back in the shadows and listen.
Mm-hmm.
Just so I don't sound stupid or something like that, basically.
So how does that apply to humility? I'm just thinking out loud. How does that apply to humility? Because I think it does.
Yeah, it does. Kind of like taking up less space, so whoever wants to fill in can fill in. But if you have something that's worth something, you should speak up anyway and put your point out versus just sit there, not be a bump in a log.
Well, it was last week I used the example from the book in regards to the bench. The bench in which a person who slides to the edge of the bench and barely takes up any room is one extreme. Is one extreme in which they have not given proper value to themselves and they don't have proper self-esteem. Maybe they feel unworthy to take up the part of the bench that is theirs. They have a right to a certain part of the bench. The other extreme is those who just kind of fall across the bench and take up more than theirs. Right. And you have a right to your part of the bench. Not to the whole bench. Right. But you have a right to your part of the bench, and that involves humility. That involves humility in which you recognize your own needs, but you also see the needs of others as well. Right. It's not tearing down yourself. It's not, right. It's not devaluing who you are in the eyes of God and what you need, because you need, just as much as others. Right. You need to feel important. You need to feel what's the word for it? You need to feel important. Yeah, I guess, right? I feel like this is a psychological class.
You're turning it into one.
Well, in the author of the book, I think, does a good job of explaining some of that, and the balance between the two, extremes. That neither one is really healthy. We need to have a proper balance of humility, and without denying our own needs, looking to the needs of others and ministering to the needs of others. But one could easily say, well, didn't Yeshua deny his own needs? He gave up everything on the cross, right? And you say no. Why would you say no?
He didn't deny his own needs.
Okay, I can hear that. I'm just kind of curious on why.
Made sure he was fed, made sure he had clothes.
Sure.
He had clothing, he had food, he had everything he needed.
Yeah.
Going on the cross was not denying his needs. Going on the cross was giving of himself for others.
Correct.
I wouldn't say that's a denial of himself. That was a giving of himself. It's,
Absolutely.
it's no different than a kid out in the street and an adult runs and shoves the kids out of the way and the adult gets hit by a vehicle. The adult's not denying their needs. They're taking care of the needs of the less able.
And I agree. I think Yeshua was serving of others. Mm-hmm. He ministered to others. He gave of others from himself. Mm-hmm. He gave of himself to the point of the cross, where he gave his own life upon the cross. But he also allowed the Father to minister to him. During his time of ministry, his Father gave him those words, "Behold my Son, whom I am well pleased." The Father gave him those encouraging words of, I am pleased with you. And Yeshua walked with us in human form. He had the same needs that we do. He's experienced the same things that we experienced. And I am certain that on some level there was a part of him that needed to feel confirmed from the Father that you are doing this for a righteous purpose. This is part of my plan. Even to the point where he would pray, Lord, Father, if it be your will, take this cup from me. So he experienced the pain, he experienced the suffering, but he had confidence in knowing who he was. And who he was. And of course, he was, the Son of the Most High God. But, not on the same level, of course, but we are sons and daughters of God. And when we understand who we are in him, and we have confidence in that, and our self-esteem is rooted in that, then it allows us to truly give of ourselves to others, because all that we need is provided by him. Does that make sense?
And he said, I don't know where it is, it's in the Gospels, but something to the effect of, come and learn of me, for I am humble and lowly in heart, or something like that. So it's like he knows what humility is, and he knows.
Right. And
he spent time, it also says that in the early hours he would spend time with God. With his Father. So I think that if I would take time to do that, then you receive from him what you need to be able to be humble, but I don't take the time.
That's a good point. And let me read to you from this week's Prayer Kadashah portion. This week we're in the second half of the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 6, he is certainly the most perfect humble spirit. Even more humble than Moses, but he was certainly the most perfect, righteous, humble spirit. And listen to these words to him at the beginning of verse 25. So I say unto you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about what your body, what you will wear. Isn't life more than food, and body more than comfort, clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or gather into barns, and yet your Father in heaven feeds them. Are you not more valuable than they? Which of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? And why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. Does that sound like, it's certainly the most beautiful, perfect, humble spirit, but it doesn't sound like somebody who was lacking in self-esteem. It sounds like somebody who had great confidence in who he was. No, not pride, but confidence in who he was. And I think therein lies the subtle difference between confidence and pride. Knowing who you are and being confident in that, but also being willing to serve others, because when you are confident in who you are in God and your relationship with him, like I said, then you can truly begin to serve others. And he was the most perfect, the most righteous servant, giving up of his own life, the only one who didn't deserve to have his life taken. He willingly gave up his own life on our behalf, and he could willingly do so because he was at perfect peace in the Father, and he had a perfect relationship, perfect harmony, and had perfect confidence and perfect self-esteem in who he is.
Well, isn't that? I think it's when he was in the garden and the mob came up and they cut off the guy's ear. I think that was when Yeshua said, I could have called down 12 legions of angels.
Right.
It's like he knew what he could do, but he chose not. He chose to submit. And Hebrews talks about how he learned to submit, just like we have to learn to submit.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like what Janet was speaking of earlier, humility requires submission. I mean, it's a part of humility to be able to willingly to submit to authority. And if not to the authority of God, then whose authority? You know what I mean? To willingly to submit to the authority of God in our lives. That requires a level of humility to be able to say, you know what? You are my king. You are my righteousness. I owe you everything. How can I do anything less other than submit to your rule and your reign in my life? How could I do anything less? Kathy, were you going to say something?
Can I share an experience?
Please,
I
by
had?
all means.
I don't want to be woo-woo or weird or anything, but last week, it's been stressful for Ray and I the past few months. And anyway, I woke up. I get up when Ray does. I got 4. And Ray had gotten up, let the dog out, and I was still in bed, and the dog came and was sitting by the side of the bed. And I was getting ready to get up, and all of a sudden I just sensed this presence, like Yeshua was standing there with his arms out. And I was like, I didn't know what to do. I was like, you just kind of feel this, that it's there. So what do? I get up, I go to the bathroom, go make Ray breakfast. And I'm making breakfast, and I go, what am I doing? Why didn't I just be quiet there? So Ray went to work. I went back in, and I went back in the bedroom, and I sat down, and of course, all of a sudden, I started talking. And you get nervous again. And I thought, I guess the more I talk, if I pray for somebody, maybe that'll be better, So I got done praying for everybody, that everyone would, and what basically was in my heart was, it doesn't matter what you do or where you go, I am with you always, is what I felt in my heart that Yeshua was saying. And I fell asleep, woke up, and then I was all nervous because I didn't stay quiet. And then I felt like what he was putting on my heart was I was weary. And then I thought of the scripture, come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And just like what we were saying about submission, we have to learn how to do that. Because even with this feeling of his presence being there, I didn't know how to be quiet there with him. The only thing I know how to do is to perform. And out of performance, then I think I'm going to have a better relationship. And that's not what he wants. He wants us to just be in his presence and relate with him and let him comfort us and give us strength. Is kind of what I got. I don't know. But anyway, that was, so.
Sounds like the battle between Mary and Martha.
It is.
Who's working and who's sitting at his feet listening.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's like something, I don't know about everybody else, but I have to learn how to do that. How to sit and be quiet and receive. But it was nice to know that even when you're screwing up, he's still with you. It's kind of embarrassing, but he doesn't leave us or forsake us. So.
I was thinking about this earlier. It's going to sound kind of weird, but in a way, Jonathan humiliates me. How does that happen? No, what I mean by that is that for the longest time, there are so many people who have come and helped out, who have been an integral part of the community, but in other areas, especially in terms of teaching and the spiritual leadership, being able to help with some of the teaching, being able to help with just various things like that. I felt overwhelmed at times, and through the years, for a long time, I felt overwhelmed. I felt exhausted and tired, and I get I waffle back and forth from discouragement and feeling like, man, I can't do this anymore, I'm tired, to the other extreme of, man, I am tired and I'm exhausted, but the synagogue needs me right now. The synagogue needs me, God needs me there, and I got to keep going. But with Jonathan coming on and helping out in so many ways, and it's hard to overestimate exactly how much he helps me. He's become a help to me. It's humbling to me because it reminds me that, no, the synagogue doesn't need me. The synagogue needs God at the center of the camp. We need him at the center of the camp, and God can provide, God can provide what I need at any time he chooses to. And just to remember that he is in control, and that God can provide another Esther at any moment. Anytime you're not ready to stand up, he can provide another Esther. Or in this case, he can provide an Aaron, to go with Moses, for lack of better description. And so I hope that makes sense. It didn't. Not to you.
Humiliates?
Yeah, no, it was a play on words. Humbles, yes. It was a play on words. I figured humble didn't sound as good as humiliates. So. It's the same root word.
So we had this discussion last week.
And look how big Jonathan's head is getting.
Its head's already been like that.
Move on.
That was a joke, Jonathan.
It can be humbling. It can be humbling at times, especially when you're dealing with, sometimes, if I struggle with the areas of humility, it's certainly in the areas of discouragement and a lack of self-esteem, and fully understanding who I am in God. And I think I'm going closer in that. I've learned more over the last few years to become more dependent upon him, to grow closer to him in that. But in no way, shape, or form does that mean that I still don't struggle with those areas, because I do. I struggle with those areas sometimes of feeling unworthy and just feeling like, who am I to keep doing this? And yet that was the very words of Moses, almost. the words of Moses, Lord, who am I? You know, I don't speak very good. Can't you get somebody else? You can find somebody else to do this, right? I didn't ask for this. And I don't think Jonathan asked for this. You know, we try to do what we're called to do. And sometimes you do feel overwhelmed. Sometimes you do feel exhausted. Sometimes you do feel unworthy and you want to give up. And you want to just throw it all down and say, okay, who am I? I can't keep doing this. Lord, you don't need me to do this. You can provide somebody else. I don't have the gifts and talents and abilities to do this. You know, I feel unworthy sometimes. And what is discouraging is when you do see so many people come and go, and you're trying, and you see that revolving door. You see that revolving door, and it's easy to focus on that revolving door. It's easy to focus on that revolving door and get down on yourself and go, here we go again, you know. Somebody's upset at me for whatever, you know, I don't know what, but, and it happens. You know, I was talking to Lori about a situation a couple of years ago in which somebody that I know never did anything to. They had nothing to do with the situation, you know, a couple of years ago when we attempted the merger a few years ago. They had nothing to do with that. And I had run into them and just, you know, tried to be friendly and tried to just talk and just be friendly. And, man, talk about a cold shoulder. You know, I was basically, you know, I'm not talking to you. You know, you're scum. That type of a thing. That can weigh you down. You know, that can weigh you down. And you can really begin to feel that. And you go, Lord, why? You know, can I keep doing this? You know, who am I? Why, you know, why do so many people, you know, why do you have so many people angry at me? Or why do so many people turn angry at me? Or get upset at the synagogue or what have you? Why are there so many arrows flying at us? And it seems like a lot. But I have to remind myself that we weren't promised an easy path. You know, we weren't promised that we weren't promised that this road would be easy, and that everybody would like us. Especially when you stand up for yourself and you stand up for others and you speak truth. You're going to find people who don't like you. You're going to find people who turn against you. The enemy is going to use that. The enemy is going to use other people to attack you and to try to tear you down. So for me, that's one of my biggest struggles is just that area of self-esteem and that area of just discouragement and feeling unworthy and just going, man, this keeps on happening. You know, why with this revolving door and why does this type of thing keep happening? You get overwhelmed and you do feel down on yourself sometimes. But in every time that happens, every single time, the Lord sends somebody into my life as a voice of encouragement. You know, some way, somehow to say, keep on doing what you're doing. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. You know, more sermons by pastors, more resignations have been written on Monday morning than any other morning. More resignations have been torn up on Tuesday. You know, in synagogues we can say the same thing. More resignations have been written on Sunday morning and tore up on Monday morning. You know what I mean? And there is that balance, especially for leadership, for those in leadership, because there are the extremes. Because on one hand, you have people who praise you and lift you up, and it's easy to get a swollen head. On the other hand, you have people who hate you and despise you and kick you and throw dirt at you, and then you feel like the scum of the earth. So,
Because you're doing something right, they don't like you.
well, I hope, I trust that God is with me, and I trust that He is working through this. And if I would say this, if we weren't having an impact, the enemy could care less. He wouldn't be paying us as much attention as he does. I think he does pay us the attention he does because there's a threat there. That being said, there's also areas that we need to humble ourselves in and recognize where can we grow. One of the things that I've talked about a number of times in as far as the synagogue, especially over the last maybe 5 years, is we must be a humble Messianic Judaism. But Jonathan, what does that mean to you when you say when I say we must be a humble Messianic Judaism? What comes to mind? I know we had talked about that before.
For me, it goes back to Micah. Love justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And it's a focus more on how can I live my life and live better for God and improve myself. Excuse me. And less on pointing fingers at somebody for what I think they're doing wrong. The age-old thing, when you point your finger, 3 more are pointing back at yourself. And Yeshua said it. Take the log out of your own eye if we take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. We got to focus more on how we're living for God, how we can improve. Less on bashing the church and less bashing other people. Showing love and mercy, compassion. That's walking a humble, Messianic Judaism to me.
I agree. I completely 100% agree. And I think that's one of those areas that is a threat. Maybe more so than any other area is the call to look internally, to look at ourselves and go, what can we do better? How can we improve? How can we live more righteously? To worry about who we are. And I think it starts as a synagogue. We don't need to worry about what's going on in the church. We don't need, why worry about what they're doing? That's, they're going to do what they're going to do, and we need to love them and minister to them where they're at, and know that, God has a lot to teach us through the church as well. There are some things that we can learn from there as well. And to focus on relationships between us and the church. And we need to focus on who we are as Messianic Judaism. There's enough within the scope of Messianic Judaism to worry about before we start worrying about what's going on in the church. That being said, it would also behoove us to focus on us as a synagogue before we worry about what other synagogues are doing and saying, what is this synagogue doing? Oh, they have, they don't have a full Torah service, or they don't have, they have all men reading, or they have, they're too egalitarian, or they have women wearing tallits, or, whatever the case may be, or they wear rainbow-colored tzitzit. Let's focus on who we are. We could teach each other properly, but in a humble, respectful way, and worry less about what other people are doing, and just focus internally. And I think that's where the real threat is, because if we can't look internally and examine the plank that is in our own eye, how will we ever be able to grow? If we can't look at ourselves and say, here are some areas in my life that I can honestly work in, can we ever spiritually grow into the people that God has called us to be? That starts with looking at ourselves and asking, Lord, what is the plank that is in my eye that I am unable to see that you need to remove? Because I'm not able to see my brother until I deal with the plank that is on my own eye. Doesn't mean that, when I deal with the plank in my own eye, that I can't point out lovingly the speck in my brother's eye. But I have to constantly ask the Lord, where is the plank in my eye? Because the moment you take out one, there's going to be another one there that's going to pop up, that's going to make us trip, that's going to make us stumble. And when we lovingly correct our brothers, we can truly lovingly correct our brothers because we're doing it in the spirit of gentleness, because that's the way we would want to be treated, right? Because we know that, hey, you know what? I've made mistakes too. So if I have to go to my brother and minister to them and point out to them, you know what, this is inconsistent, and you need to do a little bit better here. I can do that in a humble fashion, in a righteous spiritual fashion, because I have looked internally and I know who I am, and I know the mistakes that I've made, so I can also have mercy on my brother's mistakes. because I'm honest with myself, right? If I can't be honest with who I am, then how can I be honest with my brother and righteously deal with my brother? I have to look internally first. And I think that's where the threat of the enemy comes, because that's where real change happens for us, is when we're able to look internally and go, Lord, what are the areas in us that we need to improve on? And this Mussar program is a good way to start. And certainly humility is a good way to start. To stop looking at others and to look at ourselves and ask, what can I do better? Mike, I know you got some thoughts. You got some things to add?
I am a person who, like a lot of people have discussed this evening, have problems dealing with self-esteem. There are certain times that I like to be out front in the limelight, overachieve. I guess that's from my upbringing. I was trying to impress my dad growing up. And then there's other times that I don't want to be seen. I want to work behind the scenes, okay? And I guess my goal is kind of meet in the middle every now and then. I was really surprised in this chapter that they didn't bring up, they brought up arrogance, but they didn't bring up boasting. And to me, they're similar but different. And in the military, my military career, I was around a lot of people who boasted. Okay, and it just drove me crazy, okay? Don't tell me, I mean, if on a low note, I say, okay, I've been to Germany twice, I've been to Korea twice. That's not boasting. I did that and all that kind of stuff. But then if somebody says, well, oh really? You only were there twice? I was there 5 times. I always have to one up you, and people drive me crazy. So if you see Laura going across the room, it's me trying to get away from the bus.
It must be driving you nuts if you've watched any of the presidential debates then. Because it's full of boasting.
Oh yeah, yeah.
In my term, when I was governor.
Oh yeah. During that time, I kind of become a temporary resident of Missouri. You know what I mean? Don't tell me.
Right.
Show me.
Right.
Okay. In my work, I always feel like I don't do enough.
Mm-hmm.
Some days I wish that I know other people in my business who show up at an office in the morning and punch in, jump in the company truck, and they're out doing whatever they do during the day, and at the end of the day they come in. Okay?
Right.
Being independent, okay, I get paid when I'm on the job, and sometimes it gets very frustrating to me that, and I always kind of beat myself up that I'm never doing enough. I always set goals high, but I don't get done each and every day. So
That's good, yeah. There's, yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I was really surprised that in the reading that in the Messianic community Genesis 1:26, when it says that God created man in our image, okay, and us.
Right.
And in the book, it described us as the angels instead of Yeshua.
Right. Right.
So that was interesting to me.
Yep, I remember that. I remember that portion, and that's typical of normative Judaism. To us, is angels, and I think the author goes on to talk about the humility that God was expressing humility,
Oh, yes, yes.
right, by
Yes.
including the angels in creation.
Yes,
I'll leave that one alone.
yes.
I wanted
I
to.
just thought that was interesting.
It is, and I could certainly. I mean, the idea of humility, I think, is valid. You know, that God expressing humility by inviting the angels in to be co-creators. But I would change the angels. I'd swap the angels out for Yeshua,
Yes.
right? That God expressed humility by involving His most righteous Son as a part of creation. I wanted to read you something from the Path of the Just from Moshe, Rabbi Moshe Luzzatto. One who is wealthy may rejoice in his lot, yet in his responsibility to assist those who are in need. Similarly, if he is strong, it is in his responsibility to assist those who falter and to protect the oppressed. This is comparable to the servant of a household in which each servant is assigned a different task and must fulfill his appointed job if all the household duties and requirements are to be completed. Looked at objectively, there is no place for haughtiness here. The type of analysis and contemplation previously mentioned are appropriate for any person who has a clear mind, one that is not warped. When all of the above becomes clear to him, he can truly be called a humble person, one whose humility is internalized in his heart, who recalls what David said to Michal and Samuel 2:6-11, and if I were to be even more lowly within my own eyes. Our sages of blessed memory have said, how great are those who are lowly in spirit. For when the temple was in existence, a person would sacrifice a burnt offering and would be credited for the burnt offering. A meal offering, if he sacrificed a meal offering, he'd be credited for the meal offering. Yet he who is humble in mind is considered as if he sacrificed all of the offerings possible. And as it says in the Psalms, in Psalm 51, the preferred divine sacrifices are those of a broken spirit. This is a praise given to the lowly in spirit, for they possess humility in their hearts and in their thoughts. There's a lot of good stuff from Luzzatto in here, and especially in regards to the virtue of humility and why it's important and how it is expressed within our lives, and that balance. I think Luzzatto takes maybe a little bit more of a conservative approach in regards to humility, in regards to self-sacrifice, and focuses maybe a little bit more on giving than Alan Marinas. He focuses a little bit more on giving and self-sacrifice in that case. So I think this is a good balance to read with that, because it provides maybe a slightly different perspective, which is just as valuable. The value of a servant's heart, that it will be rewarded when we recognize who we are created in and our various roles and responsibilities, that we are all important. We are all servants of the King Most High, and whether you're a farmer, a teacher, a rabbi, whatever the case may be, that there's not one that is more important to the other, than that all are called to be servants of God, and all are called to specific duties and responsibilities. And we may look down upon ourselves. I find myself doing that sometimes, and you go, well, man, this congregation has 300 people. Why can't we have that? What am I doing wrong? So it's easy to look down on yourself and think, well, I'm not as good as others because I'm not in that lofty position.
So what does 300 people mean to you? Why do you want 300 people?
It's a sign of success. Again, it comes back to humility, right? It comes back to humility because I think it's a sign of success, not necessarily in the eyes of God, but in the eyes of people.
Do you really want 300 people?
Not here. You'd be having to help each other.
Well,
That's a great
That's not what I'm
responsibility.
saying. I'm saying, as a congregational leader, okay, more responsibility, okay?
With the right help, yeah.
Okay.
with enough help.
That's what I'm saying.
But-
But more responsibility, okay, which to me would, I mean, as I have had to take on more responsibility at work, it means less time time that's been taken away from the family.
Sure, and I understand that.
Uh-huh.
But it's also, let me compare it to your work. Let me compare it to a job. If you have a job, and there's a supervisor or manager position that's open, you know what? Most people would probably jump all over that. Most people are like, you know what? They're going to give me a managerial position. They're going to give me a pay raise, more authority, and yeah, that puffs up your pride a little bit. You can pat yourself on the back and say, you know what? I'm being recognized for my talents. And you want to be recognized for it, right? And you that's natural. You want to be the best that you can. You want to be the best you can, and it's natural to want to be recognized for that. I feel it all the time. I feel it all the time where I work. I'm not going to mention it because you don't have to edit it out, but although it is on the website, so never mind. I feel that from time to time because every door that I've tried to go through has been slammed in my face
Now,
over and over and over again, and it becomes discouraging. And you want to beat yourself up, or you want that encouragement. You want the recognition that, hey, I've worked hard for this. I know this. I can do this. You want the recognition. In this type of a role, in a synagogue or a church setting or what have you, how do you get that recognition? You get that recognition by people showing up. You get that recognition by people coming and filling in your congregation, by having no empty seats and being able to grow and to prosper and to feel like I'm doing something good. I'm teaching more and more people. There are more people going out there for the kingdom of God. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And it's easy to get down on yourself when you don't see that. When you see that revolving door. So on some level, I think probably the most significant level, that would be why. Because you want that recognition that, hey, I've worked hard and it's paying off.
Okay, are we ready for 300 people as a congregation, as a core?
Not overnight. Not overnight.
What do we need to do to prepare to have 300 people? Because if you have 300 people, you're going to have 300 problems.
Well, of course, yes. And
Well,
boy,
that's
is it
302
that's
troubles.
my point.
That's true.
Responsibilities,
Correct.
More phone calls at 10 a.m. at night, I'm in the hospital, you come see me,
I was thinking
I'm
2 o'clock in the morning.
yeah.
And I don't mean it as a discouragement. I mean, yeah, that can be a goal, but we need to, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, myself, prepare every day to be able to have a relationship with 300. I mean, not that mine would be one-on-one with everybody, but to be prepared to be able to take care of whatever's needed for 300 people.
I can see that, and I could definitely understand that. I think from my perspective, I think God has given me a little bit more peace over it recently, especially over the last couple of years. He's given me a little bit more peace in that way. I don't struggle with it as much. I still do from time to time, but I think the focus is, he asked me a question one time. It's a simple question. It wasn't an audible question. It wasn't like I heard an audible voice of God, but there was no question in my mind. that he was asking me a question. And he just simply asked, "Is my presence amongst you?" You know, and that was him. That was the Lord telling me, my presence amongst you, being at the center of the camp, is the goal, is what you want, is what you desire, not 300 people. I will bring the increase when it's right. You be faithful to provide a place for my dwelling. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm
No, it's fine.
what I was gonna say was, if his presence is here, that is what's gonna draw those people.
Sure.
What does it say? If I'm lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. So, if his presence is truly here and people feel it, it will draw.
Yes, but I believe it will draw at the right time,
Well, yeah.
in his time. I do get frustrated. I do get discouraged when you see that revolving door. You see people coming and going. You go, oh, we seem to take one step forward and one step back, and you go, not yet, not yet. Really? Can it be tomorrow? Really?
Now
Yeah.
for a slightly different perspective.
Yes, please.
This is my third congregation I've been a member of since I've been in Messianic Judaism. And each place I've been has helped me grow, changed me in some way. And I take that with me when I go. And, you know, the revolving door, don't discount what kind of influence you've had in those lives. When they go out, they're still been influenced by the congregation. They're still been part of it. It's not necessarily only the people that are here at one present time. It's all the people that have ever been here, who have ever been touched by here. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's a valid point. That's a good point. I had not thought of that. That's a good point. I like that.
And the thing is too, it's like, be it you teaching Jimmy or Jonathan, something will come to me during the week about what you said, you know. So if it happens to me, Hashem can be working on, like Jonathan said, anybody who's come through those doors, and you don't know what they're taking out and what they're giving to somebody else. And you probably won't know until it's all said and done.
That's true.
And wait till the day all those people come back at the same time.
And you're looking for.
Well, I do find myself constantly trying to adapt to help the congregation grow, adapt to what do people need, you know, what's going to minister to people more, that type of a thing. And I found that nothing we've ever tried works. it never works. And I, you know, it's part of it is just, you know, it's the work of our own hands. Part of it is just the nature of the Messianic community. You know, we are one of the few successful Messianic communities. Most, as I've said before, over 90% of Messianic communities, they die within 3 years. They fall apart. They break up. They're gone. They're history.
I don't necessarily think the volume of people matters that much anyhow, it's what they take out of here. You can have a synagogue
Correct.
that has 100 people, but what are they taught, and what are they taking back with them? I talked to Stuart.
I
You know,
agree.
he hadn't been here for a long time, so he asked me, oh, I just want to come and see people, and I want to talk to Glenn, which he did Saturday most of the time. And I asked him on the way home. He says, well, I'll be back sometime. I said, can I ask you a question? He said, yeah. I says, you used to come all the time. Is there a reason you don't come now? Is somebody upset you or something? He says, no, it's just I'd rather go to a Catholic church. Do you think that's all right with Jimmy? I go to a Catholic church. I said, Jimmy's not going to tell you where to go. That's up to you. But he said, it's all these festivals and stuff I can't live up to. I said, nobody told you you had to, Stuart. I didn't get ugly with him, but I was firm with him. I said, no one ever told you you had to do all this. Well, if I want to eat pork sometime, I said,
Eat it.
Eat it. No one tells you you don't have to. I says, I don't think anybody here's ever pressured. He says, well, it's just so easy to go there in an hour or so and just go home. So that had nothing to do with us. That's all on him.
And I recognize that. And I recognize as difficult as the journey can be. And if we, look, we're trying to build, we're trying to be workers in the kingdom of God. And we're trying to build this kingdom upon the earth. And if we look out at the whole and we go, what have we done? What have we done? We've barely laid the first layer. We've barely laid the first layer of bricks, and it's easy to become overwhelmed when you see the work ahead of you, and you go, I'm not really doing much here. Am I really doing anything? And then you have to take a step back and get a little closer and recognize that this kingdom is built one brick at a time. One brick at a time, and you have to look at it from that perspective. It's one brick at a time. The Yeshua will finish the kingdom when the time is right. He will be the one to finish it, but he's called us to begin to lay the foundation right now. One brick, one nail, one piece of wood at a time.
And maybe the whole point is that one brick or that one stick or whatever it is, maybe the biggest battle that we can imagine at the moment.
Yes. There was I remember a congregation in Florida. This congregation, it was a synagogue, a non-Messianic, it was an Orthodox synagogue. They had one Torah scroll, and it was getting old, and they wanted a replacement. They wanted to get a new one. And they had a scribe who had offered to do it, but as typical, I didn't mean that to sound negative, as is common, it's not cheap. It's probably around $80,000. So they were like, okay, we've got to raise the money to do this. How are we going to raise $80,000 to buy a new Torah scroll? And what they did is they started it little by little, step by step. And what they created a fundraiser in which every family, not just within the synagogue, but outside of that synagogue, anybody could come in and sponsor a line in the Torah. They could come in and, you know what, I want to sponsor that line right there. I'm going to pay for that line to be written. And when you get enough people to go in and to sponsor that line, before you know it, the whole Torah scroll is written. The whole thing is written. And if all we're looking at is that one line, and we go, well, I've got one line in the Torah. Whoopee. But instead, if you look back and go, you know what, I'm one line amongst many in the Torah. And if enough people are stepping forward and sponsoring a line, before you know it, it's all paid for. Before you know it, the kingdom of God is built. But we have a tendency to focus on what we're doing alone, instead of taking a look at the bigger picture, that God is laying the foundation right now. And he's called us to work in this area at this time. And to keep our eyes on his kingdom, to keep our eyes focused on where they need to be. It will come.
Jerry, you need to go ahead. You're going to go first. Go ahead.
The time I bring is done, I've lost it. But, what I wanted to say is that due to the fact that Messianic Judaism is a prophesied thing, and it indicates a particular time in prophecy, and I don't know why any of us would ever be so surprised if the adversary would strike as many possible blows as he possibly could, and he knows this human thing, and this humility thing, he knows it very well. I mean, he used it on Messiah, he used it in the garden, Well, if you're really the Son of God, come on, do this and do that, what's he trying to do here? But what you missed was a little over a week ago, a pastor, a very, very close friend of mine. He says he's part of my family, so Pastor Willie Sutton Jr. came, and you were out sick. There was hardly anybody in here. Jonathan taught. But what nobody else saw that we did is when we tucked him under our tallit, the man stood here weeping, and he said just a few words, I'll be back.
Wow.
I'll be back.
Awesome.
And so since I know some of the sister and brothers in his congregation, after Pastor Willie Sutton got done finished telling them how wonderful his experience here was, you're going to have a lot of black sheep in your flock before you know it. Because he just is so happy, and it was very few in here, but sometimes, I've gone to his church for a while, sometimes it's packed out, there's standing room only,
Right.
And other times, if there's 3 people sitting in there, it comes and it goes, and
Right,
you know, I know that the enemy would use that as a level of discouragement, but we're one of the few synagogues around here still surviving, and people are still showing up. And when
That's
I
true.
bring a guest like
Yeah.
that, I mean, he's got a pretty good sized congregation here. There were so few here, and everybody really saw his eyes. And I don't know when Jonathan did the Ironic lesson, this beautiful man just stood here and wept tears of joy being here on the Sabbath. And I thought that you should probably know that.
Wow, that's
He
awesome.
wants to
Thank
come
you.
back. He wants to meet you.
I look forward to it.
And some of his sheep after him, I wish you could have heard him, not him. I wish you could have heard the joy, the love, the way he expressed things. This is a man who at one point, I guess what you watched Fiddler on the Roof? Then he watched it 200 times.
Numerous times before I got one.
So the love for Hebrew people and Judaism was instilled in him very young. His whole life, all he's ever wanted was to be under a tallit, but he never actually knew why. And he wants a tallit, but he never actually knew why. He has a love for Israel that is just incredible. It's phenomenal, a love. And but I wish that you could have. I wish anybody else in your could have seen it as he stood under our tallits, just crying, and they were just tears of absolute joy. And I thought that
That's awesome.
it might do well for you to know that
I tried
Absolutely.
To
that's
get,
how he felt, and he wants to be welcome back.
I tried to get him to come up to the beam during the Torah reading,
Uh-huh.
so he could follow along.
He was terrified.
We'll get him up next time.
Yeah, okay.
We'll get him up.
What I'm gonna say, ask,
We're just so confused.
Jimmy.
It's all good. It's all
is,
good.
Look where this community has come from. After the split up, this community could have died. Okay? Met in the basement for a while. Met in church, got pushed around from room to room in the church. Listening and dancing, and singing is canned music.
That's true, right?
Okay, moved back over to the church on Shelton. And look where we are now. I mean, this is our building now,
Yep.
okay?
There's a lot that
We have a worship leader.
many would
Okay.
Jonathan's great.
And I mean, instead of maybe looking where you want to be, look where we have come from up to this point.
Yeah, where we come from, because
Okay.
there are so many others that have not even been put through all of that, that just don't exist anymore. They really don't. And
Boy,
they're,
isn't that the truth?
You know,
Yeah.
in these processes and things, I kind of see it as a season of being, of God helping us to put down really strong roots, so that every time the wind blows, we're not tossed and turned. When you're rooted strong in Him, rooted strong in what you believe, all these tests and trials that this congregation has managed to survive, and there have been many, and you're still standing, and we have an amazing worship leader, not to make his head swell, but he really is. And he works hard around here, and it's seen, and Janet works hard. Everybody in here does what they do, and they all work hard. And you're still here, and you're still standing, and I see that, look at all this, that what has happened is throwing those, when the Lord speaks about tree roots, throwing those roots down so strong and into that living water. And then when these storms hit, they don't tear this congregation apart. You know, this congregation has become genuine family, a genuine love. Love draws. The presence of God draws. And I totally agree with Sharon on what she said. The presence of the Most High is here. You don't have to worry about the 300 sheep. They'll be knocking the walls down to get in here.
Yeah.
You know, but don't be discouraged in where we've come from, Rabbi.
Oh, I
See the joy
understand.
that we're still standing. All these mishaps, you know, we just keep putting our roots down and grow a little bit stronger and stronger like a tree.
I completely agree. Just need to remind myself of that, or get reminded of that every once in a
Let
while.
the sheep come out and bite the shepherd once in a while.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And, we will continue to, probably experiment on things to see what works best. But those are surface level things. I think spiritually, we've come a long way. I think spiritually, as I've said before, I think when we a Messianic Judaism that focuses the majority of its attention on their outward appearance, on their outward expression of Judaism, is in many ways kind of a sign of an immature Messianic Judaism.
Amen.
When you begin to really dig down into the inside of the cup, and you start to really focus on cleaning the inside of the cup, I think it's a sign of a little bit more of a maturing, not necessarily mature, but a maturing Messianic Judaism. And when we can have a humble spirit, I think it's a sign of a maturing Messianic Judaism, because that allows us to mature and grow. But we had to become a little humble. I think in many ways that's why he allowed us to grow through what we went through.